Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing very well, thank you.
Excellent.
My name is Stephanie Yarborough. I'm an economic development attorney at Womble Bond Dickinson. I've had the pleasure of knowing Senator Scott for a long time. We have walked manufacturing facilities together. I'm involved in opportunity zones because I get the call a lot of time from companies that say, I'm physically located within an opportunity zone, so can you please help me go take advantage of that incentive? So we have to back up a little bit and explain that that's not how this works.
Right.
Can you share with us some examples of wonderful success stories throughout the United States that you've seen created as a result of opportunity zones?
Yes, so certainly. I was in Dallas, Texas just recently, and there's a group of investors led by a guy named Ray Washburn who's doing a $400 million investment, creating more than 2,000 permanent jobs, partnering with one of the largest minority-owned or minority-led construction companies. They do about $2 billion a year. They're going to build housing, retail, I think light industrial, light commercial as well. This is a massive project, but one that is going to be a marvel of the country. There's someone here in the audience from Arizona, Quinn Palomino. Where is Quinn? Over here on the right side, if you're sitting, left side if you're sitting here, who is involved in a number of hotel projects in Arizona and other opportunity zone projects throughout Arizona. She has put together something called Virtual Partners that is working throughout Arizona and I think parts of California and spreading throughout the country in a wave to take advantage of the opportunity zone designation, but having a community focus in her ROI, which is amazing, the type of developers that we have and investors we have coming to the table.
Absolutely, absolutely. Have you seen other states and specific communities within states enact policies or legislation to enhance what's already available just by virtue of being in an opportunity zone to make it even more substantive for the state?
Yeah, so I would say that the couple states, Maryland has done a pretty good job. They're one of the leading states in the country of having the governor and the lieutenant governor. Lieutenant Governor Rutherford and I had a call and then a conference where I interviewed him about some of the ways that Maryland is incenting entrepreneurs and investors to take a second look at the state. In the DC, Mayor Bowser has put together a loan fund to help investors invest in Ward 7 and Ward 8 in Washington, D.C. She is, I think they have low interest loans. They're willing to use the TIF, which is a tax increment financing vehicle, in order to help build the infrastructure that will be necessary for the investors to see the ROI that they're looking for. And they're also including opportunities for workforce development as a part of the package in Washington, D.C. Illinois, the city, I think south of Chicago, they have a 3,000 employee event happening right now. They're all over the state, all over the country, frankly. Here at home in South Carolina, in North Charleston, the Metanoia Project, a nonprofit organization, has taken an old school and renovated it or refurbished it into apartments and studios for folks who are working in the entertainment and art industry. Mayor White here, Knox White, is working on a project where he has created incentives on, I forgot the number of acres, but $75 million project near the water, Riverside, that is going to be a fantastic approach of having mixed housing where you have affluent folks living in condos to workforce development housing to affordable housing, all within the same footprint. So there are incentives in each of these projects, and there's a coordination or collaboration from density issues to TIF agreements to states providing low interest loans as well. So there is that combination, but as important as that, we have the federal government led today by the chairman of the committee is Ben Carson, who is taking 13 different agencies and looking for ways to synergize the resources of the federal government to bring those to bear within those opportunity zones where the poverty rate is too high and the unemployment is too high.
When you think about opportunity zones, you think about typically low-income communities. There aren't that many restrictions on the type of projects that can utilize the benefits of being in an opportunity zone and an opportunity zone fund. What was the thought given behind that? Just to have creativity, to encourage development, not to put a lot of restrictions. A lot of people have been pleasantly surprised by that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there are limited restrictions that probably have more to do with the type of business that we don't want in the opportunity zones than it does the type of businesses that we do want in the opportunity zones. Perhaps when you think about the fact that my why was more important than the how or the what, my thought was in so many ways the government has good intentions to alleviate poverty and change communities. It's just been very slow in seeing that manifestation in those communities, particularly those communities where I grew up and so many kids have been stuck in generational poverty. My thought was if we hamstring the investor and the entrepreneurs, we'll get less from them. And therefore the design of the legislation was for it to be as open as possible, putting the parameters or the boundaries on those areas that need the help the most. That was number one. Number two, we want to put an incentive in there so that you would be incentivized to not run and gun. So I don't want investors coming in and leaving quickly. My goal was to have a 7-year investment, a 10-year investment, because the last thing I want is for investors to be able to come into a community and make a profit, but leave the community no better off than prettier buildings. That is not my objective for opportunity zones. My objective is to actually see the good people who live in those communities benefit from the new resources coming into the communities. And in Spartanburg, there is a great project, I think it's called the North Point Project, that is started before an opportunity zone was created, but it's a collaborative effort where the existing community has like 3 out of the 9 seats, or like a third of the seats on the development board, so that they are able to have input and impact on how the development happens. And so I continue to point people to the excellent projects here in South Carolina that have led the way, but for me, restricting investors only means we'll have less investment. The only thing worse than new dollars coming into a community are no dollars coming into a community.
Absolutely. What are some of the, now that we're about 2 years in, what are some of the unintended consequences, both positive and negative, that we've seen coming out of the Opportunity Zone legislation?
Yeah, so the negative consequence, which is something that I'm going to have to work on, is that part of the design of the legislation was to make the boundaries as clear and the rules as simple to follow as possible. But I did not have the foresight to see the complexity of some of the projects that would come into the zones. And so when you think about a $400 million project, the investment horizon, the time to get the capital, invest the capital, it's short. It's a mistake that I made in the design of the legislation. If I had to do it over again, I would make that investment window far wider, because it hamstrings some of the investment potential. So that's one of the flaws of it. So my hopeful fix for that is to, if I can get it done, y'all say a prayer for everybody in Washington, but on this topic, please say a prayer for me. If we could push the legislation back another year, add another year to the 7-year window, it would give more investors more time to make the decisions that are in the community's best interest and their best interest, and that would give them more time to actually get the capital together, put the deal together, because when you're thinking about a $50, $100, $400 million deals, it is a far more complex process, and it takes several months to get that kind of money together for most deals. On the positive side, there's a firm out of Mississippi that's done 15 opportunity projects already, and they've got 10 or 12 more on the docket. I met with a fellow, Barry, last night, and this group has the heart that I love for the community, and they're willing to make good money, but not great money, in order to do more good in the community. So I've been shocked. There's been a lot of negative stories about opportunity zones. There've been a lot of positive stories. What I've been shocked about is how seldom the press wants to publish the good being done in so many of the zones and how quickly they are willing to look at the few areas where cherry picking has happened.
We get a lot of calls from people saying, I'd like to invest in an opportunity zone. However, the area I'm looking at is not currently in a designated, so can you go and change those boundaries? Do you think there will be a mechanism in the future to revisit those designated opportunity zones to possibly change that on a going forward basis?
That's one of the questions I get a lot too, Stephanie, is can we change? I mean, the opportunity zones are great, but did you know you left this one spot in a donut hole? I was like, I didn't leave this spot, actually, but the answer is no.
It's a good answer.
I smile when I say it, though.
But no.
Doesn't help a lot. So the fact is that I think it was March 20th of 2018, I think it was, that the governors had to make the designations, and then we gave them until April the 20th or another 30 days to figure it out because some needed more time. And they were locked in. So what the challenge is that the 8,700 zones represent about 25% of the potential zones around the country. Each governor was restricted to only 25% of their new market tax credit areas that are designated as distressed communities. So it's a limited approach. We had hoped, and I still hope, that this will be the first iteration of opportunity zones, and the facts are that as we move forward from a legislative standpoint, we'll have another chance, another bite at the apple in a few years once we prove that opportunity zones are good for the community, good for the investors, good for America. That's going to happen, and as that happens, I think we'll have a bipartisan coalition that will be willing to make a couple of changes to it, to include the reporting requirements. I think it's incredibly important that we know who's doing what, where, and why. That reporting requirement that we had to strip out because we used a vehicle of reconciliation, which basically means you can't have the reporting requirements that did not fit into the technical definition of the vehicle of reconciliation. Said differently, we need to get back to a place where we understand and appreciate who's investing, where they're investing, what the response is, what the return is, what the benefit to the community is. I want everyone to be able to see in plain sight what the opportunity zone legislation means to the community as well as the investors. If we have that kind of transparency, it's certainly easier for us to resell part two.
Sure. I was working on a project in a lesser developed part of South Carolina, and a manufacturing facility had closed down, and the new potential owners came to town, and there were people lining the streets outside the facility holding resumes. And the owner of the company walked around and collected them. Yeah. And I said, what are you going to do with those? And he said, they'll be the very first people I hire.
Awesome.
And it was in an area that needed it. So,
absolutely.
And so many times, certain areas within our state, within our communities, don't have a chance to compete for jobs, and we know jobs support families. How do you respond to critics that say that the beneficiaries of opportunity zone legislations are the wealthy investors and not the low-income communities? How do you respond to that?
Well, 60% of opportunity zone residents own their own property. In opportunity zones, we've seen about a 20% increase in the value of those residences. And so if you think about the wealth gap in our country, the most important asset that one owns in America today is the home they live in. And so when you see the increase in home values, you're actually seeing the increase in one's net worth. So I'd start there. The second thing I'd say is that the only way for us to see wages go up in the most impoverished areas is to bring more entrepreneurs into those areas. And frankly, what we've seen inside opportunity zones is about a 6 to 8% wage increase. You have to take that with a grain of salt, because in America we are now celebrating a 3% wage growth, which is fantastic. We haven't seen a 3% wage growth in more than a decade, and we've seen it quarter over quarter after quarter. More importantly than the 3% wage growth is if you take a look at the Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, you'll see that the bottom 20% earners have seen a 5% wage growth in this current economy. So when I talk about a 6 to 8% wage growth within the opportunity zones where the jobs are today, that outstrips even the best numbers we've seen in more than a decade. So if we can continue to provide more jobs in those areas, it makes it easier for folks living in low-income communities to have jobs that they can walk to, that they can get to, where transportation and other obstacles are not in their way. So it is a piece of legislation. There is no panacea to poverty. That's what I've understood after almost 10 years of research on this specific topic of poverty. How do we address it? I think we need an all hands-on-deck approach to government sources of trying to keep folks comfortable or moving forward is just ineffective in and of itself. We have to find a way to attract the private sector back into communities where the needs are really high. And if you're going to do that, the investor needs to make a return on their income or on their investment. And at the same time, the jobs that they're creating are the most likely jobs that will employ the folks who are living in the communities. Here's another, I think, important stat as I think this through a little bit. We have created about 6.5 million jobs since we passed the tax cuts in 2017, or thereabout. More than 50% of those jobs have gone to minorities, African Americans and Hispanics. 2/3 of those jobs have gone to minorities and women. And so what we've seen is that when you continue to put more employment opportunities into communities, when you have a 3.5% unemployment rate, you start attracting folks to the workforce that have either A, been overlooked, or B, been long-term unemployed. You're starting to create a pressure on the wages because your unemployment rate is so low. You're also attracting more folks to the workforce because they now have a chance to take a second look, and you're overcoming some of the hurdles that are in the way. So when you have the opportunity zone legislation working at its highest level, what you do in an economy that has a 3.5% unemployment rate is you automatically are seeing that pressure on wages going up. You're automatically bringing folks who have been left out of the workforce for a long time, which historically is disproportionately women and minorities. So you're seeing what I call the trifecta at work, which is a really, really cool thing for the lack of a politically correct word. Just cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We hear a lot in communities when we go out and talk around South Carolina about opportunity zones, that in those low-income communities, there are a lot of multi-family housing projects being done with opportunity zone funds, and how you just touched on how that's making it easier to get to work because you're removing that transportation hurdle.
Absolutely.
And we're hearing from companies that they're enjoying investing in multifamily housing because we know it's getting more and more difficult to find workforce that shows up to work. So you're eliminating that. You're creating a bit more of a campus-like atmosphere. Did you anticipate that that would be one of the wonderful impacts of this legislation?
You know, I think the answer should be yes, but the actual answer is nah. I did not anticipate that. That's one of the unintended consequences of legislation designed by more than one person is you get a lot of smart people in a room, and folks are able to design legislation that has multiple benefits that I could not have envisioned. I am excited, and it's heartening to see the use of different housing stocks as a way to meet the needs, the growing needs, especially in our state where our unemployment rate is lower than the national unemployment rate. But what we're struggling with getting folks to work and getting them to work at a wage that they can live on. And one of the ways that you overcome those hurdles is you reduce the cost of getting to work. And the government doesn't have to do that. Sometimes the private sector is the best vehicle to get that done. And that happens by making sure that you have the type of density where you want the work and the development to happen. And so when you watch cities and counties use, whether it's that tax increment financing vehicle or whether you use the PUDs, the planned unit developments, which allows for a higher density in certain areas so that through that higher density you can attract the jobs and they can work. You can look throughout South Carolina and you start seeing that mixed use development is actually benefiting the average person. And frankly, in the destination economy that we're living in today, where people can live anywhere in the country and still go to work or by going from their bedroom to another room in the house or by walking across the street, it is incumbent upon us in South Carolina for us to continue to look for ways to improve the likelihood that someone wants to live and work in the same community. And that will help us with our infrastructure challenges. I'm not sure if you've driven on the road in South Carolina, but it is harder than it used to be to get from point A to point B because our infrastructure challenges are real and they're statewide. So to the extent that we can find a way to have better planned developments in communities, I think we start using our resources in a way that are far more effective than we have in the past.
Last question.
Yes, ma'am. I have one for you.
Oh, good. Well, why don't you go first?
No, you go. No, ladies first. This is still the South.
With all the wonderful things that you're doing for South Carolina on a national stage, your leadership has just been phenomenal.
Thank you.
And we are luckier because of it. Of all the many things you could choose, how did we get lucky enough that you chose this area to put your time and your passion and your energy into?
Wow, that's a good question. Honestly, I have been so blessed to have a second chance at life that so often too few people have the privilege of maximizing their potential in a place where the people that love them the most see more in them than they can themselves. And I was blessed because not only did my mother and my mentor, but even where I went to school, when I was flunking out, my teachers saw potential in me that I just wasn't focused. I wasn't applying my best. And I'll tell you that anytime you are blessed that early in life, you should spend the rest of your life making a path for someone else and spend the rest of your life paying back people who made sure that I was not a statistic that people would frown upon, but I'm in a position to hopefully help others benefit from the mess that used to be my life, the message that it became, and the messenger I hope to be for the good Lord and for the concept of hope being real and opportunity being alive. So,
extraordinary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so my question for you, Stephanie, is I hear you may have a big weekend coming up soon. Is that accurate?
I do have a big weekend coming up soon.
What's your big weekend?
I am. We were just talking about this. I'm getting married.
You're getting married?
On Saturday. And you just spoke to my fiance is John Few, who's in the front. My fiance is John Few, who you spoke to. He's in the front row.
You're marrying the guy on the front row?
I am marrying the guy on the front row.
Wow, you got lucky, guy. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all for being
you.
here. Good luck on the opportunity zones.